It's not hooked to anything, except for the floor. That's the one I'm always trying to step on. I can just stand in it. I feel like I stand in the next to cords the whole time.
Once I have the energy, I will do another chord sorting that will be on
2 seconds as soon as they, like, yeah.
The congregation may be seated, and I invite the children to come forward for a brief children's sermon before we invite you to Children's Chapel. Children and young at heart. Anybody else want to come down? Come on. Good morning, friends. How are we doing? Everybody having a good weekend so far? All right. Come on down. That's okay. You sit right here next to us if you want to, Milo. You too. Come on, Dustin. Have a seat. I know you're wearing Dustin's name tag, so I'm going to call you Dustin. Anybody know what this is? It's like a blanket. It's a Jewish prayer shawl. It's a Jewish prayer shawl, and it was given to me by a dear friend who is Jewish. And I treasure this vestment. It's kind of like the vestments that clergy wear because it was worn kind of like this oftentimes. Sometimes they might even put it over their heads like this and cover their faces to pray. Oftentimes they wear it over their shoulders like this, our Jewish brothers and sisters. And we're going to learn some Hebrew this morning. Everybody ready to learn some Hebrew? This tassel that you can see, there are 4 of, tied on all 4 corners of the prayer shawl. These tassels are called tzitzit. Everybody say tzitzit. It's spelled T-zit-zit. Tzitzit. Everybody say it again. Tzitzit. And the tzitzit are connected to the edge or the corners of the prayer shawl, the edge, the hem of the garment. And the hem of the garment is called kanaf. Everybody say kanaf. So the tzitzit are attached to the kanaf. And the tzitzit, these tassels, were commanded by God in the Torah to be tied to the edges, the hem of the garments, the kanaf, in order that God's people might remember God's presence with them always, especially as they pray. So if you look really carefully at these tassels, at these tzitzit, you'll see that there are 5 knots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, tied into the tzitzit. See those knots? And in between the 5 knots, when you tie 5 knots and space them out, you create 4 spaces between them. 1, 2, 3, 4. See the 4 spaces? The 5 knots each represent one of the books of Torah. One of the books of the first 5 books in the Hebrew Scriptures. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. 5 books of the Torah. The 4 spaces in between the 5 books of the Torah represent the letters that get transcribed, the letters for the name of God. When Moses asks the burning bush, "Who should I say sent me?" God says, "Tell them that I am who I am." And from that point forward in the Hebrew Scriptures, God's name is kind of unutterable. God's name is so holy that you don't say it out loud. And so it becomes this transliteration of letters, Yod, He, Vav, and He in Hebrew. Yod, He, Vav, He. They look like Y, V, H, V. Yod, He, Vav, He. And it's Y, H, V, H, I should say. And so that's where we get Yahweh from. The name of God, Yahweh, is from Yod, He, Vav, He. So right here in the tzitzit that are attached to the kanaf, you've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. You've got Torah, and you've got the name of God, Yod, He, Vav, He, Yahweh. And so what would happen is faithful Jewish people would wrap these tzitzit around their fingers like this as they pray, as a tactile and physical reminder of God's presence with them and of their call to live by Torah, by the way, by the law of Torah, right? And so you could argue that these are the precursors to prayer beads and rosaries, right? These are the ancient form of rosary, of a tactile way to pray. And then Brother Aaron, who was of the Levitical family, he was a priest who helped Moses out a whole lot. Aaron would get up and he would wrap the tzitzit around his fingers like this, and then he would pronounce God's blessing on the people like this by spreading his arms wide. What does this look like? A bird. And these look like what? Wings, right? Wings. So guess what the Hebrew word for wings is? Kanaf. The same word as the edge of the garment, the hem of the garment. So wings and edge of your garment, the hem of your garment is the same word in Hebrew, kanaf. So everybody, one more time, we're going to practice tzitzit attached to the kanaf. And the rabbis would raise the tzitzit and spread the kanaf and pronounce God's blessing. And there became a wonderful saying that was, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Meaning, may you follow behind your rabbi, your teacher, so closely that the dust from your rabbi's sandals kicks up on you. May you follow your rabbi so closely that you get covered by all the kicked up dust. So I'm going to pronounce that blessing on you now as you go to Children's Chapel. You guys are going to go just right out there with Miss Sarah into the parish hall. You're going to make your own seat this morning. Pretty cool, yeah? So as you go to Children's Chapel this morning, may you go with God's blessing and may you be covered in the dust of your Rabbi Jesus. All right, you'll head on to Children's Chapel. We'll see you soon. Babylonian exile. And in the midst of that massive upheaval and transition, God's people had not kept God's commandments. They had retained some of the Babylonian ways that they had learned, and as a result, had lost much of their faith that God's presence was with them. The prophet Malachi is called by God to remind God's people of who they are and of who they are to become. And he foretells of a time coming of judgment for those who do not return to God's ways, and a time of hopefulness for those who do. Malachi said that for the faithful, the time was coming when the Son of Righteousness would rise with healing in its wings. The Son of Righteousness would rise with healing in its wings, and wholeness would be restored. These prophetic words fascinate me. First of all, we're talking sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N. The Babylonians had a god of the sun, S-U-N, and it's clear here in the Hebrew that Malachi is toying with the religious syncretism of the people as they return from Babylonian exile. You may have lived with a people who worship a sun god, Malachi says to them, but the God of your ancestors, the God that we worship here in our homeland, our God is the God who summons the sun, who calls forth the sun. And that God, our God, will usher in a day when the sun, S-U-N, of righteousness will rise, and it will have healing in its kanaf. In its kanaf. The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings. Fast forward about 500 years, Jesus is on his way to the home of a leader of the synagogue whose daughter has just died when he's interrupted by a woman who has been hemorrhaging for 12 years. Not only must this illness put her in a constant state of exhaustion and physical weakness from the loss of blood, it would have also othered her. Unable to bear children, with no husband, and continually unclean by the purity standards of her faith, this dear woman has been cut off and is anathema to her community. She is both unwell and disconnected. It had to have been a miserable existence for her. And what is it that this suffering woman does? She touches the kanaf, the hem, the edge of Jesus' garment, grasping for her own healing by making a bold claim about who it is that she thinks Jesus is. She believes that her suffering might end and she may be made whole again if she only touches the fringe of his cloak. She believes he is the Son of righteousness who has risen with healing in the fringes of his garment, in his wings. Though she speaks not a word, her actions tell an unforgettable story. She acts out her faith, declares herself a believer in and a follower of Jesus by the literal works of her hands. And the result, your faith has made you well, Jesus says. Your actions have become your salvation. And instantly, the text says she is not only physically healed, but now has a path back into relationship, back into connection, restored, reintroduced to her community. And that whole thing, that whole story happens as an interlude within an interlude. A leader of the synagogue has interrupted a dinner party that Jesus was attending with Matthew and some of his fellow tax collectors and sinners because he is convinced that if he can only find Jesus and get him to lay his hands on his dead daughter's body, that she will live again. So Jesus follows this man to his home, chases off the professional mourners and tells them that they are no longer needed, which they laugh off. And he takes the girl by the hand, and the text says she arises. She is risen up into new life. That dinner party that was interrupted occurred on the occasion of Matthew, the tax collector, following Jesus. As a Jewish man and a tax collector, Matthew was a traitor, a contributor to and a participant in and a beneficiary of the oppression of his own people, all the while lining his own pockets and serving the God of empire. Jesus calls Matthew to a new life using the same invitation that he had used with those fisher folk just a few days before. Follow me, he says. And at those very words, the text uses the same word as with that little girl. Matthew arises, and in doing so, leaves his former life behind, leaves behind all those choices that he made, and finds a new risen life in following Jesus. I think each of these vignettes has a twofold invitation and challenge to us. Each of these vignettes invite us to see with Jesus' eyes. To see with Jesus' eyes. For the unbounded mercy of Jesus, no one is invisible. No one is too unwell. No one is too far gone. No one is untouchable. Where the world sees a traitor and a sinner, Jesus sees a disciple. Where the world sees only death and grieving and mourning, Jesus sees the opportunity for new life. Where the world sees an unworthy and unclean outcast, Jesus sees some of the boldest and bravest faith in all of the Gospels. And each of these vignettes bears witness to the ancient Christian realization that when faith is a verb, an action-driven orientation of our lives, when faith is a verb, everything changes. The little girl's father, the suffering woman, and Matthew, the tax collector, are all compelled to action by what they believe to be true about Jesus. And as they act, each of them becomes a participant in their own salvation. When our faith leads us to see ourselves, see each other, see even those we struggle most with through Jesus' eyes, then the world can begin to change. When our faith is more than a Sunday morning activity, when our faith is more than a weapon that we use to villainize others online, when our faith is more than an intellectual exercise that we inherited from our families, when our faith instead is something that compels us to act in ways that are merciful rather than vindictive, to admit how we have contributed to the suffering of others, and then we walk away from those choices. When our faith compels us to act in ways that include rather than other our fellow human beings, then we too arise. And we can hear him saying to us, your faith has made you well.